So, when you hear the word fascism, what first comes to mind?
Well, for a lot of people, right, it's those old black and white newsreels.
Yeah, exactly. History. A political thing from way back. Or maybe you just think, only really evil people could be involved.
Right. But what if? What if that capacity, the underlying mindset, actually exists, maybe just a little bit, inside all of us?
That's a heavy thought, and that's what we're diving into today, isn't it? A really challenging but maybe really insightful source. The Fascist State of Mind by Christopher Bollas.
Yeah, Bollas really pushes us. He wants us to think about fascism not just as politics, but as, well, he calls it a psychic profile, a state of mind.
And the kicker is, he argues the state of mind could be in anyone, even folks who see themselves as, totally committed to liberal democracy. Okay, let's try and unpack that.
What's really fascinating, I think, is how Bollas just messes with our neat categories of good and evil. He connects like deep personal psychology stuff with these huge historical events. And that's why getting this bigger picture that the seeds for terrible things can be inside ordinary people, why that's so important for you listening to kind of grapple with the nuances,
Absolutely. So let's start where Bollas starts, kind of setting the stage with some historical takes on fascism.
Okay.
He brings up Benito Mussolini back in 1932. Apparently, Mussolini said his program was simple. It was all about men and willpower.
Not detailed policies. He felt there were too many of those already.
Right. Then you've got Gramsci. He had that famous line about fascism being the attempt to resolve the problems of production and exchange with machine gun fire and pistol shots.
Wow. Yeah, really gets to the violent heart of it, doesn't it?
It does. And Fritz Stern, he called it conservative revolution, an ideological attack on modernity, like on everything that makes up our liberal, secular, industrial world.
And if you put that against, say, the Enlightenment, it's a total clash. Fascism praising the state, the militant will of the masses.
Yeah, versus the Enlightenment's focus on, the integrity of individual man, checks and balances, republics.
Exactly. Now, Bollas is careful here.
Yeah.
He says he's using fascist state of mind metaphorically. He gets that it might not be, perfectly accurate for the historical movement itself.
Okay. So why use it then?
He argues it's a highly identifiable psychic profile, a pattern of thinking that, he says, authorized a fascist theory. And then he drops the bombshell. There's a fascist in each of us.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And this is where it gets, like you said, really interesting, maybe quite uncomfortable. Bollas points at something pretty startling. He looks at thinkers like Freud, who explored the dark side of humanity, right?
Yeah, the unconscious aggression.
But Bollas says they seem to, overlook and downplay actual mass atrocities happening around them.
Like what?
He gives the example of the Armenian massacre, February 1915. 800,000 Armenians killed, 75% of the population wiped out.
And Freud?
Bollas says there's no mention in Freud's work, just one single passing reference to earlier pogroms.
Wow, that's striking.
It leads Bollas to ask this really provocative question. Is the Holocaust, even though it's this undeniable symbol of evil, also somehow acting as a way for us to mentally negate ongoing genocide?
Like, we focus on that one event so we don't see others?
Maybe. He mentions the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, millions killed there. And he reminds us, we say never forget, but it seems we seem all too able to forget. It really makes you wonder about that blind spot. Why do we do that?
That blindness. It connects to what Hannah Arendt said about terror. She defined it as making it possible for the force of nature, or of history, to race freely through mankind, unhindered by any spontaneous human actions.
So terror removes our ability to act, to intervene.
Yeah, it lets these forces just run wild. And the terrifying thought Bollas raises is, does genocide become a kind of social license to remake the world according to one's vision?
A license. Wow.
Think about that French revolutionary he quotes, saying nobles aren't his species, they're wolves and I shoot. That thinking led from 3 executions a week to almost 200 a week.
That escalation is chilling.
And Cooper, another scholar Bollas cites, asks this really uncomfortable question about the Communist Manifesto. The way it dehumanized the bourgeoisie. Could that have been a necessary step before Stalin could eliminate millions?
So the ideas paved the way for the violence.
That's the suggestion. It links back to what Mikhail Gorbachev said about perestroika. He suggested we need to think not just about what we have done, but about who we are when we license genocide.
Yeah.
It's a deep challenge to our self-perception.
Okay, so Bollas is building this case for an internal potential, but he also addresses the pushback, right? The critique that psychoanalysis just labels fascists as mentally ill.
Yeah, he brings up Noel O'Sullivan, who thought that whole approach was dangerously complacent.
I'm complacent.
O'Sullivan felt it just explains fascism away, like pushing it into a psychiatric ward.
Yeah.
His points were, one, it assumes any sane person must be a liberal, so fascists are just disordered. And two, it couldn't explain why other countries that had lots of fatherless kids after World War I didn't also go fascist. So basically, stop calling them crazy. It's more complex.
Makes sense. So how does Bollas answer that? How does he avoid just saying they're nuts?
Well, this is crucial. He tackles that insane other idea head-on. He says, quite directly, "It is my understanding that the pathology found in the fascist movement is inside each of us."
Inside each of us.
Yes. He uses the example of psychoanalytic training, where the goal is to show the future analyst the evidence of neurotic and psychotic processes within the ordinary self.
So normal people have these potentials.
According to this view, yes. And Bollas argues it is possible to be both a liberal, believing in a parliamentary world, and yet capable of developing a fascist frame of mind.
Wow. So democracy's checks and balances might stop genocide.
But the mindset itself, Bollas argues, is ordinary.
Yeah.
It's something that can actually subvert the democratic mind from within. It's not an external enemy necessarily, it's internal.
Okay, so if it's internal, how does this subversion actually happen? Inside our own heads.
Well, Bollas uses this really interesting metaphor. He describes the mind's normal state as kind of parliamentary order.
Like a little democracy in your mind.
Exactly. Made up of all the varied parts of the self.
Yeah.
Instincts, memories, needs, worries, how we react to things. All these voices are supposed to get represented, get processed.
Makes sense. Like different MPs debating.
Right. But Bollas says this internal parliament can break down under intense pressure. Things like overwhelming greed or envy, or maybe a deep fear of being harmed.
And what happens then?
Those parts of the self, the difficult ones, get projected out, kicked out of parliament, basically.
Yeah.
And the mind is left, well, denuded of its representative constituents, stripped of its complexity, its checks and balances.
So it simplifies itself dangerously.
That's the idea. And other psychoanalytic thinkers describe similar mechanisms. Eric Bremen talked about the practice of cruelty becoming this singular narrow-mindedness of purpose.
Narrow-mindedness.
Yeah, it squeezes out humanity, stops empathy, forgiveness, wanting to make amends, all those complex human things.
That just gets shut down.
Shut down, or in some Kleinian psychoanalytic views, actively killed off. Rosenfeld described destructive narcissism as people identifying almost totally with their destructive parts, killing off their loving, dependent self.
Killing parts of yourself intentionally.
It can even be conscious. Look at Mikhail Bakunin's Revolutionary Catechism from 1869. He literally wrote that all the tender feelings of family life must be stifled by a single cold passion for the revolutionary cause.
Wow. That's explicitly saying shut down your humanity for the cause.
Exactly. It's like the mind turning on itself. Rosenfeld even compared this destructive narcissism to a powerful gang inside the mind, led by a dominant part, making sure everyone supports the criminal destructive work.
A gang inside your head. That connects to things like the SS training camps, right? Where they watched each other.
Precisely. Making sure no one stepped outside the ethos of terror. Like Hannah Arendt said, terror becomes total when it becomes independent of all opposition. There's no escape, inside or out.
And you mentioned Robert Lifton's study of Nazi doctors.
Yeah, Lifton talked about doubling, the mind splitting into two functional parts. Like you'd have your normal self and then an Auschwitz self.
An Auschwitz self to cope.
To cope and maybe to transfer the guilt. These Auschwitz selves became psychically numb. They refused to even use the word killing.
Dehumanizing the act itself.
And Lifton put this in the context of Germany after World War I, this feeling of failed regeneration, a collective illness. Hitler then offered this grand vision of total cure.
And the cure was?
The cure became genocide, framed as total, invincible, transcendental. The victim wasn't a person, but a disease needing elimination through a fierce purification procedure. It's medical language used for mass murder.
So whether it's one person's mind or a whole group's, Bollas says a key part of this fascist state of mind is ideology. But not just any ideology.
Right. It's an ideology that maintains its certainty through specific mental mechanisms aimed at eliminating all opposition. And Bollas notes, ideology itself is normal, it's quite ordinary. We all have belief systems.
So what makes it turn fascist, in his view?
It's when that ideology has to become total. Hannah Arendt described totalitarian ideologies as claiming total explanation. They disconnect from real experience, have a kind of secret truth, and twist facts to fit.
So our normal human need to make sense of things that can curdle.
Exactly. That's the seed, Bollas says. When the ideology demands totality, the mind can entertain no doubt, uncertainty, self-questioning. Those become weakness, things to be expelled.
Expelled from the mental parliament.
Right. And this leads to what he calls a special act of binding. The mind loses its complexity, becomes simple, held together by these rigid bindings around the signs of the ideology.
What kind of signs?
Slogans, catchphrases, oaths, even things like the flag. They fill the space where complex, multiple meanings, what he calls the polysemousness of the symbolic order, used to be.
So language gets flattened. A flag means only one thing. A word means only one thing.
Precisely. He uses the example of the '88 U.S. election. Dukakis talking complex issues, Bush making liberal, just a simple sign of weakness, using the flag to signal difference. For Bollas, that simplification marked the end of discourse, potentially an emergent fascist frame of mind.
Wow. So the first casualty is complexity.
The first murder, Bollas calls it, is the elimination of the symbolic, of multiple meanings. Because complexity, nuance, that's the true subversion of ideology.
It reminds me of that Freud quote Bollas uses.
Yeah.
About how just thinking by yourself like a monologue is dangerous because you push away uncomfortable thoughts and end up overcompensating with certainty.
Exactly. You shut down the internal debate and become rigid.
And the result of all this simplification, this internal violence, is what Stuart Hampshire described the Nazi era as creating this dizzying sense that all things are possible and nothing is forbidden.
Yeah, an infinite moral space, open for natural violence and domination, which leads, Bollas says, to a deep moral void.
A void. Emptiness inside.
Yes, and the fascist mind, facing this void it created, does something chilling. It splits off this dead core self and projects it into a victim.
So you take your own inner deadness and put it onto someone else.
And that person becomes identified with the void. They become a disposable non-entity. This denial and projection fuels delusional narcissism. You idealize yourself by destroying any alternative view.
And the destruction itself becomes good.
It gets idealized. The process of annihilation is idealized. Your own thoughts, if they challenge the ideology, are seen as contaminates. The mind idealizes purging itself, trying to create this new, forever empty self, with no contact with others, no past, a future entirely of its own creation.
That sounds terrifyingly pure, like wanting to erase everything.
It does. Bollas connects it to Nietzsche's Ecce Homo, where Nietzsche talks about this intense instinct for cleanliness, needing to vomit up nauseous internal objects to stay pure, saying, I perish under unclean conditions.
And how does that apply to, like, everyday life?
Well, Bollas asks, what about our own desires for pure Christianity, pure objectivity, pure science, pure analysis? That drive for purity taken to an extreme
Can become destructive.
can become this internal purging. The more you annihilate opposition, the more delusionally narcissistic you become, idealizing yourself as this cleaning process.
Which brings us back to Mussolini, that quote about war being like maternity for men.
Yeah, Bollas reads that struggle not as real combat, but as a permanent war against internal conflict, against engaging with opposing views.
So the male maternity isn't about creating life.
Bollas offers a horrifying interpretation. It's a metaphor for the death camps, where people are stripped of everything, culture, family, identity, turned into these bizarre fetuses to be killed in a deadly womb, creation through destruction.
That is profoundly disturbing.
It is. And it links to ideas like Kata's circuit of depersonalization.
Yeah.
You submit to power, then pass that domination onto a victim, losing yourself in the process.
So the camp becomes a metaphor for the mind.
Yes, a metaphor of the psychic process of fascism. Humane parts are dehumanized, exterminated. Death work is idealized. Think of Susan Sontag's point about using illness metaphors, calling opponents a cancer. It makes eliminating them seem like necessary surgery.
An idealization of the anti-human.
Exactly. And Himmler's speech to the SS sums it up perfectly. To have gone through this and remain decent, that has made us great. Bollas calls this a grandiosity that achieves nobility by rising above the human. It's completely twisted.
Right. This is heavy stuff. So we have genocide, the ultimate act, but Bollas talks about something before that, right? Something more common.
Yes, and this is crucial. He talks about Raphael Lemkin, who coined genocide. But Bollas introduces intellectual genocide.
Intellectual genocide.
He calls it ordinary genocide, the genocide of everyday life. It's the mental process precursor to the actual act. It's common, easily identifiable. But because it seems unremarkable,
It can escalate.
it can emerge into mass murder. That's the terrifying part. It starts small in everyday interactions.
So what does it look like? What are the signs?
Bollas outlines 2 types. First, committive genocide things you do, like distortion, subtly making someone sound less smart or credible, can become slander. Decontextualization, twisting someone's words by taking them out of context. The extreme is literally removing people from their homes.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
Then there's denigration, just belittling someone's views, making them seem silly. Caricature, going from mocking views to mocking the person, turning them into a cartoon. Character assassination.
Yeah.
Attacking their personal character, often using gossip. It basically removes them from serious consideration.
Gossip as intellectual genocide. Wow.
Then, change of name. Shifting from normal debate terms to slurs, he mentions historical examples like kikes, gooks. That's a step towards elimination. And finally, categorization as aggregation, where someone loses their individuality and just becomes one of a group, like saying, oh, she's just a Freudian, or he's a Jew, as a way to dismiss them entirely.
So it's all these ways of stripping someone's standing, their complexity, their humanity, bit by bit.
Exactly. And the second type is omissive genocide things you don't do. The main one is absence of reference.
Meaning?
Intentionally not mentioning someone's work, their life, their culture, like taking a writer off the shelves, or just never acknowledging past atrocities, erasing them by omission.
Okay, so what happens to people who are targeted by this everyday intellectual genocide?
Bollas says they might react in different ways. Some might just leave, go into voluntary exile. Others might start expressing really extreme views themselves, almost out of desperation.
Or it affects them physically.
Yeah. Somatization, getting physically ill from the stress. Or sometimes they might even try to ally themselves with the person attacking them.
That's grim. So what about us, if we see this happening?
Bollas is clear. Alarms should ring. We have a responsibility as witnesses.
What can we do?
Well, don't participate in the gossip, for one. Or maybe even confront the person doing it. The goal is to arrest intellectual genocide by simply talking about it in the here and now, naming it, not letting it slide.
But here's a weird thing. Boll points out sometimes the people who are really good at this intellectual genocide, they become popular, even liked.
Isn't that strange? He mentions examples like a right-wing figure in Southern California, Nixon, even Stalin being called good old Uncle Joe, people who could be vicious, yet somehow endearing.
Why would that happen? Fear. Or do they somehow represent something in us?
Bollas talks about the impossible loved object, where loving them somehow lets you off the hook from having to oppose them.
Love is an excuse.
Sort of. Or turning their awfulness into humor. We laugh about the atrocious things they do or say, and the person becomes the focus of the laughter, not the atrocity itself.
He tells that story about his high school teacher.
Yeah, in the 50s, Orange County. This history teacher would go to these anti-communist rallies, sometimes with Reagan speaking, and become rabid, hating the liberal conspiracy.
The students.
They turned him into this loved madman. They deliberately provoke him, push his button, just to watch him go into this local psychotic state. It was like entertainment.
So they were kind of enabling it by making it a spectacle.
Totally. Bollas calls it dissociative acceptance. It's like when people excuse bad behavior by saying, oh, but deep down she's lovely, or he's different when he's not on stage.
Using their humanity to excuse the inhumanity.
Exactly. And Bollas says that's perverse. By tacitly accepting the viciousness, you're accepting the eradication of the humane as a joke. He states it really strongly. When we excuse the destructive behavior of anyone by citing their humanity, we commit a crime against the function of humanity.
A crime against humanity itself.
Because it corrupts truth. And that corruption provides the essential contextual support for the fascistic parts of someone to take root and for the whole group to slide towards its own fascism.
So what happens if you don't collude, if you witness this and don't laugh along?
The witness feels shock first.
Yeah.
Speechlessness. Dissociation, like feeling deadened. Bollas calls this victimage. You're impacted by it.
And this whole dynamic creates a vicious circle.
Yeah, both in logic and as a process. The logical fallacy is arguing someone is good because they're human, ignoring their bad actions. It's flawed reasoning that twists truth.
Okay, and as a process.
It's where solving one problem creates another, which brings back the first one, maybe worse. In the fascist mindset, the drive for certainty makes you empty your mind of opposition. But that creates a moral void.
Which increases the uncertainty you are trying to escape.
Exactly. It undermines the person. It's a self-defeating cycle. Bollas connects this to Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, this constant purification by expelling opposition, leaving a void. Nietzsche wanted this calm inner sea, but it came from dissolving disagreement, and he still felt disgust for the human element.
So the inner peace is built on destruction.
And Bollas draws that chilling parallel again. The fascist sea of inner tranquility is mirrored by those horrid seas of internment camps that contain the fascists' vomit, the place that purifies them because it contains the indigestible opposition. The internal landscape matches the external horror.
Given how deep this goes, how destructive it is, how do people even begin to recover, especially from extreme situations like the camps?
It seems almost impossible. Bollas discusses Bruno Bettelheim's experiences in Buchenwald from his book The Informed Heart. Bettelheim saw that any humane gesture meant death, expressing feelings, torture, or death. Oh. If you lost your humanity completely, you risked going mad.
So what did Bettelheim do? How did he survive mentally?
His strategy was observation. He studied the SS, kept an intellectual distance. His aim, he said, was to protect my inner self, so that if I should regain liberty, I would be approximately the same person I was.
He created an inner space.
Yeah, a split. Outwardly compliant, inwardly thinking, observing, remembering. And Bollas highlights this. Thought and memory, the capacity to perceive reality, to think it and remember it, become the core of potential recovery.
Remembering is key.
Crucial. For individuals or groups who've suffered genocide, remembering what actually happened is crucial. It helps make the crime's objective real. It helps recover from that survival mode where you had to shut down your own humanity.
Because survival might have meant doing things that cause immense guilt later.
Exactly. That enormous loss of self-respect if you felt you deserted others to save yourself. Recuperation needs self-analysis and self-expression to rebuild that self-love.
So the first instinct is survival.
The ultimate human response is self-preservation. But after liberation, Bollas says that drive moves back toward its abandoned humanities, first by memory, then by speech, and finally by true grief.
Grief is part of healing.
Essential. And Bollas sees this triumph of survival, that seemingly inhuman Darwinian drive, as ultimately more humane than the collusive acts of humanizing the monstrous parts of the self that we talked about earlier.
And for a whole society, how does a society recover from committing atrocities?
Same principle. It will have to remember the crimes it has committed. Remembering comes before forgiveness of self or others, and it's necessary for the reparative rehumanization of the group.
But that's hard. People want to move on.
Of course. Bollas warns against the obstacles, denials, saying it's water under the bridge, and transfers to the next generation, trying to push the responsibility onto kids or grandkids, absolving the generation that actually did it.
And does that work? Can you just pass it on?
Bollas concludes, pretty bleakly, that the new generation is highly liable to inherit the sins of the fathers. If that remembering and confronting doesn't happen, the cycle continues.
Wow. Okay. This whole deep dive into the fascist state of mind, it's definitely been challenging, but the main point seems clear. This isn't just some external political force. It's a potential psychological pattern inside us.
A set of mental moves, simplifying, idealizing the self, projecting out the bad, ultimately destroying complexity and opposition. It's a sobering look in the mirror, potentially.
It really makes you think about the importance of spotting that ordinary genocide, the everyday intellectual kind, and that vicious circle of making excuses for destructive people.
Absolutely. It calls for, well, self-awareness first, and maybe the courage to challenge it gently or firmly when we see it in others. It's about being conscious of these tendencies.
So that phrase, never forget, maybe it means more than just remembering historical horrors. Maybe it also means constantly looking out for this fascist state of mind in ourselves, too, and deciding how we react day to day.
Because, as Bollas reminds us, even with the best intentions, we seem all too able to forget.
So the question for you listening is, what will you choose to remember, and how will you choose to act?